Slay the Spire is a really weird game, not because of its gameplay or because of its graphics, but because of the year that it came out. Oh, hold on, I know I sound like a lunatic, but lend me a few moments of your time and allow me to explain. This story starts all the way back in the ancient time of 2017, when Slay the Spire first comes out. Now, this was not the finished build of the game, but this was the first time that players were given free roam of the Spire and finally got to see what it would play like. From what I can find through personal hours of rigorous research, the game was quite different and much more difficult than the Slay the Spire we know and love today. But after 2 short years of early access, the full game finally came out in 2019. Remember this little fact for later. This is the year that I want to bring attention to in this video, and is the reason why I say that Slay the Spire is such a weird game, because to me, this game is much more recent than I remembered. I swear, this game was around like 10 years ago, yet I know people who claim that it came out during or slightly after the pandemic finished. Now, why is that? While there are multiple reasons for why people believe things happen at different stages of time, or have different interpretations of the same event, the main one, and the one we'll be discussing in this video, is the Mandela Effect. This obviously isn't a new thing and has probably been discussed thousands of times, but I genuinely believe it plays an important role in the point that I'm trying to make in this video. But for the uninitiated, what is the Mandela Effect? The Mandela Effect is a psychological phenomenon where people misremember details about events or share false memories that never happened. The term was coined in 2009 by paranormal researcher Fiona Broom after she noticed that many people shared the false memory that Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s, when he was actually released in 1990 and died 23 years later in 2013. Now, there are a lot of you who probably don't remember or know who Nelson Mandela was, so instead, to prove my point, we're going to take a little test. I promise you did not need to study for it, and if your memory serves you correctly, you should pass with flying colors. First question, which one is the real Pikachu? That's right, it's gonna be one of these, and like I said, as long as you have your wits about you, you should have no problem answering my questions. Moving on, second question, does the infamous Curious George have a tail? Third question, only 2 more to go, how is Looney Tunes the cartoon spelled? And the final question, does the Monopoly Man wear a monocle? Now, I'm sure that all of you watching this video got every single one of these questions perfectly correct, but just in case, let's run it by the answer key. Pikachu does not have a black spot on his tail, Curious George is a tailless monkey, Tunes is spelled T-U-N-E-S, and the Monopoly Man has never worn a monocle. Like I said, for some this will be the simplest test you will ever take part in, but I'm sure there's some of you who got at least one wrong. This collection of incorrect parallel thinking comes from a few different factors. To begin with, and probably most importantly, the brain fills in gaps in vision or memory to make a congruent and continuous thought or visual. That's why your brain can completely fill in your blind spots to the point where you can see just fine, yet you can miss what's actually there. You see, our brains don't like to be tricked, regardless of how easy that is, and will try to make up information to fill in the gaps of our knowledge. This is why when 2 people argue over Pikachu's tail or Curious George not having one, neither of them will back down, both thinking that they're being gaslit by the other. Because according to their bundle of nerves in their command center we call a brain, they're both remembering it correctly. Growing up, I thought that Ho-Oh came out in Hoenn. The older generations that I went back to retroactively play easily get jumbled up in my mind, and I thought that Ho-Oh was a Hoenn bird because of how similar both their names sound, thus further solidifying my belief that they came out together. Therefore, you can imagine just how shell-shocked I was when I found out that Ho-Oh came out for the 2nd generation of Pokemon, the Johto region. Which, honestly, why release a Pokemon that sounds like another region? I know this was before Hoenn came out, but come on. Game Freak should have probably anticipated this mistake, especially when their core demographic are children who play video games. Going along with the theme of Pokemon, I'm sure you're all familiar with the concept of shinies. Rare Pokemon that have no difference in any aspect compared to the other members of their species besides their color pattern. During Generation 6, I discovered that I love shiny hunting and would breed eggs for hours on end. It's actually because of this fact that I know quite a bit about shinies and their origin. So when I discovered that I had many friends that thought shinies were originally introduced in the 1st generation of Pokemon, I may have had a conniption or 2. Now, you and I both know that wasn't true, right? But there's a really interesting bit of information that makes believing this fact seem almost plausible. You see, shinies were introduced in Generation 2. However, a Kanto Pokemon from the Gen 1 games did have a chance to be shiny when transferred to the newer generations. This has to do with the Pokemon's determinant values, which if lined up in a certain way, would allow the Pokemon to appear shiny once transferred to a game that's in full color. This is one of the main ways that the Mandela Effect grows and becomes more relevant over time. Little tidbits of information which alone don't prove anything substantial, but with the passing of time and the burial of the full picture help create a false memory in the minds of those who believe it. The Mandela Effect is as popular as it is because none of the offenders on the list I questioned you on earlier in this video had any egregious mistakes. You could very easily see Curious George the monkey having a tail, or the Monopoly Man wearing a monocle, or Pikachu with a black spot at the end of his tail. That last one actually comes from fake versions of Pokemon merch made in the 90s, combined with the fact that Pichu, Pikachu's pre-evolution, has a black tail. I used to believe that about Pikachu as well, and when I thought about it, I would think that it'd be weird if Pichu just lost his black tail when evolving. Then again, Raichu does exist, so clearly I didn't think it through fully. Now you may be wondering what any of this has to do with Slay the Spire, the original topic of this video, and that is a fantastic question that I promise we're gonna get to. I think that this discrepancy between the perceived time that Slay the Spire came out is part of the Mandela Effect and has to do with when the game was released, how long its early access window was, and when it became extremely popular in the media. Let's start with the release of the early access version of the game all the way back in 2017. At this time, I didn't know that this game existed, and it would take a few months before I found out about it. But once I did see how popular it was and how many people were talking about it, a part of me just assumed that this wasn't a new game at all. I think back to 10 years ago and I would just assume that a game with large hype around it must have been a pre-established fanbase due to a released product. I don't think I truly understand just how many people could be hyped around something that isn't out yet or that wasn't finished. Mind you, I did know that Slay the Spire wasn't early access, but I thought it was more akin to a Kerbal Space Program or DayZ situation, which were games that had been released in early access and had stayed in that state for multiple years on end, allowing plenty of time for hype to grow around the game. I think that this is the main source for why I believe that the game was 10 or so years old, and 4 years older than it actually is. But I think I have a better reason for why people think Slay the Spire came out more recently than half a decade ago. Looking on your screen now, you will find the Google Trend data for Slay the Spire. If we look at February of 2018, we see a large spike, which just so happens to correlate with the time that I personally found out about the game as well. But then, we see a normal gradual decline until April of 2022, which is pretty odd. This boost in searches caused it to be the most popular Slay the Spire has ever been. The only time that it was close was recently when Slay the Spire 2 was announced. Funnily enough, Google Trends only gave this most recent push a 99, meaning that the press around the game 2 years ago even supersedes the announcement of the sequel. This is my primary case for why people believe that Slay the Spire came out quite recently. Now, I have tried to find out what happened during April of 2022, but I personally couldn't find anything that would cause this massive of a jump. Of course, I wasn't an active player at this time, so it may be obvious to some of you, but please let me know in the comment section if you know why. All I can think of is the global pandemic that caused millions of people to stay inside and look for things to do, like video games, presumably roguelikes with insane replayability, to play for hours on end and not end up bored by the four walls around them. While I do think it's a bit of a cop-out to say that the pandemic is to blame for why people have a messed up sense of time and reality, it cannot be overstated that COVID ruined many people's perception of time altogether. The pandemic itself was only about 2 years in length, yet I cannot find someone that thinks it felt that way. Regardless of whether you were a kid in school, a college student, or a fully employed member of a workplace, the pandemic froze everything for everyone. Time will only tell just how detrimental the coronavirus will be in relation to our memories, and the Lord above only knows how much the Mandela Effect will come into play because of the quarantine we were all subjected to. Slay the Spire is the first of many victims that came out just before the pandemic and became very popular after the fact. Thus, if you knew the game before the world ended, you may share a similar opinion to me that it came out well before its release date. Meanwhile, if you found out about the game during the global shutdown, you may be of the belief that it's a recent game that took the internet by storm with how quickly a community was formed around it. This is more of an interesting thought experiment than anything else, but I think it's fun to look at why we as people just decide to make things up and keep them as facts in our brain. This isn't when I'm going to be considering my in-depth analysis of Slay the Spire, and I would love to spend more time and attention to really go over this game with the fine-tooth comb that it deserves. But for now, that's all I have for you guys today. If you enjoyed this video and my personal opinion on why I think Slay the Spire is in such a weird position, then please hit that like button below. Hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell so that YouTube tries to notify you whenever I upload a new video. A lot of people who watch these videos are unfortunately not subscribed, and I would absolutely love to hit 2,000 subscribers by the end of this year. I know it's a pretty lofty goal, but I truly am in awe of this community and think it's amazing with what we've been able to accomplish so far. That's all from me, folks. I've been Will, and I will see you all later.